March the 18th, a day not unlike today. Two vessels were plying the waters off Lake Erie's Long Point Bay that day. One of them, the Captain K, was fishing. The other, the Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker Griffin, was dropping off marker buoys, ironically trying to make the bay a safer place to be. At around 1:30 in the afternoon, the two vessels met in a metal-shearing, bone-crunching collision. It sent the Captain K and its three-man crew directly to the bottom of Lake Erie. There were no survivors. In the next half hour, we'll try and tell you exactly what happened that fateful day, why it happened, and what could have been done to prevent the tragedy. The huge Coast Guard icebreaker Griffin sits at anchor in the middle of Long Point Bay. This ugly mark on its bow is the only real hint of what went on just a few hours before. The ship and its crew are marking the spot where they think the Captain K went down. As the first reports of the collision reach shore, search and rescue efforts are well underway. On shore, residents of this small fishing village wait, their eyes focused on a point miles out into the bay.
It's over to the right to the right. It's way over on the horizon.
Their thoughts are with crewman John Walsh, Dean Felker, and Captain Gary Spate. No survivors have been found during the countless hours of searching, but still they wait by the shore. 20 kilometers out, the salvage operation is about to get underway. The accident occurred over one of the deepest parts of the lake, and that will later make it more difficult to try and raise the stricken trawler. Pembina Explorations donated its men and its equipment. It was Bruce Petrochuk's idea.
Well, when the incident occurred, we realized from our background that the OPP divers would be limited to 200 feet of water depth. We had sitting in the harbor this vessel and the equipment and the men and the talent to work in that water depth safely. So we just offered our services on behalf of Pembina Exploration for the families involved.
But the diving is tough and very dangerous. The divers can't see what they're doing, and the Captain K's nets are a constant source of trouble. Diver John Gallagher.
Now basically with that kind of visibility, the diver would be into the net before he would know what was happening. He could become entangled. And then on top of that, you're sending down a safety diver into the same situation with zero visibility, a man hung up.
I'm glad we got the job done. The only reason I think most of us were out there was just for the families of the crew.
At 10 a.m. Easter Sunday, the light mast of the trawler breaks the surface of the lake. An hour later, that part of the salvage operation is over. Under cover of darkness, the battered trawler is towed into Port Maitland. Friends and family quietly observe her final voyage. After more than half a century on the water, the Captain K is strapped to a barge, her nets dangling limply, her three-man crew trapped lifeless in her wheelhouse.
How much of a chance do you think those guys inside had? None at all.
On Wednesday, April 3rd, the Port Dover fishing fleet comes home early, their nets full of fish, their hearts full of sadness.
It's going to be sad. It's going to be friends missed.
Well, everybody feels pretty bad about it. I mean, you don't expect things like this, eh? I don't know, it's just everybody's got a down feeling towards it right now. See what happens when the inquiry comes out or whatever, the results.
Port Dover's Main Street is quiet. The shops are closed. The townspeople are here.
Our reaction immediately was one of shock, surprise.
Michael Turner is the Deputy Commissioner of the Canadian Coast Guard.
Most distressed by this. This is, first of all, a human tragedy for all of those involved, particularly the families of the 3 men who lost their lives. In addition to being fishermen, of course, they're also sailors, just like those on the Griffin, and there's a special bond for all of those who go down to the sea to earn their living. So it certainly was quite a shock to us.
Rick Meisner represents area fishermen.
I don't think that you necessarily want to try to establish what everybody's supposed to feel out of this, because I don't know that they know what they're supposed to feel out of this. It's a tragic accident that has happened. The government is doing their own investigation, but you can be sure there's a lot of people want to know a lot of answers.
Coming up, the investigation. What happened to the Captain K and the Griffin that fateful day in March? Why did such a tragedy have to occur? Well, the Federal Transportation Safety Board and the OPP have both conducted their own investigations. But so far, the results have not been made public. In an effort to shed some light on the situation and find out what might have happened, Chris Duncan went out and spoke with some of the men that were on the water that day. Here's what he found out.
When the fishing trawlers sailed out of the Port Dover harbor on March 18th, the skies were clear. That was at 5 o'clock in the morning. By 9:30, a thick fog had rolled in. A few hours later, disaster struck. The Captain K and her crew were gone. Their story will never be told, but we can get a pretty clear picture of what happened that day from fishermen who were out on the lake. Men like Ed Long, one of the last people to have radio contact with the Captain K.
I couldn't see him visually, but by radar he was half a mile inside us. And I talked to him, and he said he was clear, and he said, yeah, okay. And I asked him what he was doing. He was going to go in the bay and like course for home. That's good dragging grounds. He was going to try to drag there, like nobody around. And that's the last I heard him.
Ed Long couldn't see the Captain K, but he knew exactly where she was. For fishermen, fog is a job hazard. When it happens, and it happens fairly often in the spring, radar and radio are a sailor's lifeline.
You still feel a little nervous.
Long has been fishing for nearly 18 years. Even the most experienced sailors are uncomfortable in the fog.
Because you're operating a vehicle or the boat, and you got there's gas wells you always got to look for, like the buoys. You don't want to get on one of them, get hooked up. Or there's other boats, you know, and they're looking at you, and you're looking at them, and you tell them how deep of water and approximately where you are, and everybody sort of looks after everybody else.
And the Coast Guard oversees it all. They are the traffic cops of the Great Lakes.
Well, when you encounter fog, whether it's a Coast Guard ship or any other ship, there are standard procedures that you're expected to follow. The most important, of course, is to keep a sharp lookout, and you're also expected to operate at a prudent speed, reducing speed if necessary, and to sound the foghorn at regular intervals.
Whether or not the Griffin followed standard procedure won't be known until the investigation is over. But we did learn from American Coast Guard veteran Kevin Wells just how tense it is in the fog.
Nobody wants to hit anything, and nobody certainly wants to be hit. You are very on edge. You're not relaxed, that's for sure. Sometimes you will wake up additional people if you're not comfortable with what you've already done by putting another lookout to watch the lookout. If you're that uncomfortable with it, it depends. It's a tense time.
Wells often assigns a crew member just to watch the radar. We're not told if the Griffin did the same. From the beginning, the central question of this investigation has been, how could the Griffin, with its sophisticated radar system, fail to detect a 20-meter fishing trawler?
There's a lot of variables with radar. It's sometimes difficult to spot a smaller vessel because of his silhouette, because of the dispersion of the radar, and because of his profile. You may just shoot your radar beam over the top of him.
That is the fishing signal that was being exhibited by the Captain K.
Safety Board officials are in Kingston putting the Griffin's radar to the test. This fishing signal will provide a vital clue. It was found among the charts, radio equipment, and other gear in the twisted wreck.
The purpose of this is to establish at what distance, the maximum distance, we can see the fishing vessel using a variety of signals, one of which is a radar reflector, the other of which is a fishing signal. And the fishing signal we have was the one that was being exhibited and used by the Captain K on the day in which she collided with the Griffin.
The experiment is conducted in the middle of Lake Ontario, with a local trawler named the Airdrie in the role of the Captain K.
Would you take the radar reflector down now and put the fishing signal up?
From the bridge of the Griffin, safety board officials instruct the Airdrie to alternate the two devices at different headings and courses. The fishing boat sails directly at the ship, 8 nautical miles away.
Ideally, these tests would be conducted using the navigational equipment from the Griffin and the Captain K. But the radar unit aboard the Captain K was destroyed in the collision.
We may never know if the trawler's radar was working, but a clue comes from Ed Johansson, whose boat crossed paths with the Captain K just a few hours before it collided with the Coast Guard ship.
I looked out the starboard side here. Sure enough, he was within 70 feet of us, 80 feet of us. So I turned to the port, he turned to his port, and we just cleared each other. And he got, what do you say, put out about it, so he just ended up pulling up his door, pulling everything aboard and headed down. He said, I'm going down in the bay. Well, there's no boats to bug me. He says, I'm going down drag by myself. So
that was at approximately 12:15 p.m. It would have taken the Captain K about 30 minutes to clear Long Point and head toward Port Dover. That put the fishing boat and her crew on a collision course with the 3,000-ton icebreaker. They crashed at about 1 o'clock.
one of them was my cousin's boy, John Walsh.
His was one of the first fishing boats to answer the Mayday. The C.J. Weaver was another.
They're searching, like we were, I think I can speak from a deckhands, they all had a cold feeling. I had a cold feeling. And we just looked and looked and looked and looked, hoping we can find something, you know. Hope it wasn't even true.
Anyways, we got up to it, and I seen the cannon on the side of it. Oh, what the hell is this horse shit? That's exactly what I thought, you know. And realized it was a Coast Guard cutter. And something was wrong somewhere.
The fishermen had no idea a vessel the size of the Griffin was even in the area.
We never heard nothing. And there's 20 boats fishing out there, and they didn't hear nothing.
Nobody of them knew he was there. Nobody knew he was there at all.
But did the Griffin know the Captain K was there? If so, when? And if not, why not? A spokesman for the safety board says the tests in Kingston showed that there was nothing wrong with the Griffin's radar. That didn't surprise Ed Long.
Nobody was watching radars. Like, that's what impression I got, because they couldn't have. We all watched ours, and we go all along good enough for the day. Even searching later on, we had to search in fog.
You gotta have a guy on watch, so nobody was there, I would say.
That explanation is almost universally accepted in Port Dover. Speculation has been rampant here since the tragedy, and there's a good deal of cynicism where the investigation is concerned.
The ship's crew wasn't checked for drugs or alcohol. Police concluded there were no grounds for such tests, even though they didn't board the Griffin until some 24 hours after the crash.
We are an independent agency, completely independent.
The man in charge of the federal probe goes to great lengths to dispel any worries about impartiality.
We do this day in, day out. We have a responsibility to ourselves as professional mariners and to the board and to the people of Canada to be completely honest, forthright in our findings. And I can assure everybody that this will be so.
An entire town is watching.
It's an accident that shouldn't happen. Should never happen. So somebody's got to pay for it. The lives of 3 fellows, fishermen.
Coming up, the families react. Port Dover is a very tightly knit fishing community. The men and women here know this lake well. They know how bountiful it can be, and they know how deadly it can be as well. Rick Gamble spoke with some of the families of the men who went down with the Captain K, and they shared with him their pain as well as their pride.
These people are bound together not just by the lake, but by their loss.
It's been a few weeks now since the Captain K went down, and the emotions aren't quite as raw. So sitting around John Felker's kitchen table, some of the family members can begin to talk about what they want to remember and what they can't forget. They want people to know that Gary, Dean, and John were more than just numbers in a police report, and they want it recognized that even if the three men died for nothing, they didn't live in vain. Most people know Dean Felker's father as Reb, a steelworker who passed on his love of motorcycles to his son. He struggles to sum up the life of a young man that's still very much alive in his memory.
He's a fisherman, he's a biker, he's a guitar player and a singer, a poet. He's a friend.
Dean was 28 and a bit of a loner. In fact, his nickname was Solo because he spent a lot of time by himself reading, writing, or working on his Harley. That was his prized possession. Dean Felker couldn't swim. Maybe that's why his paintings of Lake Erie portray a dark, foreboding place. And he did try a number of jobs away from the water.
But he came back to fishing because I think more than anything, there's a camaraderie with fishermen. The same as people that ride motorcycles.
Dean and John Walsh worked together for more than a year on the Captain K. Just 19 years old, John was the rookie. He was known as Little Beaver to his friends.
My brother, he has his own tug, like a small gill nutter. And John, he went on the lake with him when he was 9, 10 years old. On the weekends, you know. He really enjoyed that. And he always, like he said to me, he says, one of these days I'm going to be a fisherman, you know.
He was kind, he was generous. He had a desire to marry and have children. Even at his young age, he spoke of it. And he was so proud when we had our last baby, a little boy, the first brother he had, and he couldn't walk in the house for 5 minutes. And he had that baby in his arms. Even if he was in to say, I'm going somewhere, he'd pick the baby up, you know, and hold him and then out the door, you know.
The family says John loved to fish in local creeks and rivers, too. He was popular with the girls, a rock music fan, and serious about his job. He had that much in common with Gary Spate, known to almost everyone here as Shotgun or just Gun. Ironically, the 48-year-old captain had a reputation as one of the best and most safety-conscious skippers anywhere on the lake. This chart, for example, was always in his hands when he was on the water. It was salvaged from the wreck of the Captain K.
For his own personal knowledge, he marked in every snag, every gas well, everything that he ever ran across that wouldn't be on any other chart.
Tom Hagen was Shotgun's best friend. The two men had a common love of the Captain K, and when the boat went thundering down, Tom lost not only a future with his friend, but a big part of his past. That's because Tom's father was made skipper of the Captain K in 1945 by the Colby family, which was one of the biggest fishing outfits in the area. Named after the founder of the company, William Cap Colby, the Captain K was where Tom learned how to fish when he was 14. Tom often went trawling with Gun.
Just as a point of interest, I was supposed to go out the Friday before because Dean's grandfather was being buried and I wasn't feeling very good. So I got another man. And I said, well, okay, I'll go out with you on Monday just for the ride. And it was a nasty rainy day that morning. I still wasn't feeling so hot, so I didn't go. So that's why I'm here talking to you today, or I'd have been on that boat that day.
Tom has had a hard time dealing with the gut-wrenching sense of guilt.
It made me a little bit more religious than normal. Because what are the odds of that boat being at that spot at that time? Like 10 seconds later, I mean, he was by it. What are the odds? And it just tells you that, you know, when you really get down to the nitty-gritty, we don't have a damn thing to say about when we go. It's not our decision.
All of the family members are trying to come to terms with what has happened. The anguish and the anger demand answers.
I want to know how he was killed, sure. I want to know how all of them were killed. It's the only way we're ever going to try and avoid another accident like that.
Something like this should never happen again, regardless, you know. This accident that happened, it should never happen to start with.
We don't need to be told that our fish tugs are inadequate or anything else. We need to make damn good and sure that if somebody's out there supposedly to save our lives, that that's what they're there for, not to put us down the bottom. That shouldn't have happened.
But it did, and all the families can do now is try to move on as their loved ones would want them to. And in a poem called Green Sea Blues, Dean Felker has written what easily serves as a haunting epitaph for himself and for his friends.
I look down the cliff to the sea far below, and I think how inviting those cool green depths seem. One outward jump and a flight downward slow, and the sea, my last friend, helps me end this dead dream. And all that I'll leave is this notebook behind, on the edge of the cliff for someone to find. Maybe you'll read this, though I'll never know. Goodbye to you, friend. To the ocean, hello. Solo.
The final voyage of the Captain K is now being told in court. Captain Gordon Stogdale of Toronto and Third Officer William Bennett of Guelph have each been charged with 3 counts of criminal negligence causing death and dangerous operation of a vessel. A preliminary hearing is now underway. And as well, the families of Gary Spate and Dean Felker are suing Transport Canada, Captain Stogdale, and Officer Bennett.
Up next, CTV's action series Counter-Strike. Luke's old girlfriend is showing up on his doorstep with a little bundle of joy. Let's Counter-Strike next on CKCO TV.
And I've got to live on that or I think I'd go nuts.
One day you'll refuse to believe that it's really happened, and then you sort of give your head a shake, and then you say, but it has. He's not coming back, you know, and you just go on.
I know of at least one guy that's quit fishing altogether because of it. He just doesn't feel safe out there anymore.